Perfect. Perfect.
The year is 2006. Bethesda releases what would become their most monumentally successful title at the time, The Elder Scrolls IV: Oblivion. Showered with praise by fans and critics alike and selling a whopping 9.5 million copies, Oblivion was the definitive open-world RPG on the market. And while it's since been overshadowed by its more prominently recognized younger brother, it's still considered one of gaming's greatest RPGs. However, this is a Bethesda game, and if you know anything about these guys, you'll know that an error-free experience is a social construct in their eyes. However, I'm not talking about a glitch. Instead, I'm referring to one of the most notorious audio blunders in video game history. See, you'll eventually bump into a character named... No, I'm not trying that. Who offers master speech training, ironically enough, if you talk to every single beggar in nearly every city. However, once you do talk to her, you might end up questioning her credentials a bit, considering that she comes equipped with a full-on blooper in her dialogue.
I heard that thieves broke into the Arcane University, the Imperial Legion compound, and the temple all on the same night. Wait a minute, let me do that one again. I heard that thieves broke into the Arcane University, the Imperial Legion compound, and the temple all on the same night.
Believe it or not, this is not the only flub in the final release, as there are a handful of other NPCs that have similarly unrefined dialogue, but this one is arguably the most notable of the bunch. It became so iconic, in fact, that when the Oblivion remaster rolled around, the originally uncut dialogue remained intact, though whether this was a cheeky acknowledgement of its popularity or a 2-for-2 mistake remains a bit up in the air, but I'd argue that it's probably the former rather than the latter. This is what I'm talking about today, some of gaming's most embarrassing, hilarious, and baffling mistakes that were somehow left in the game's final release. Enjoy! Alright, so let's kick things off with The Legend of Zelda: Twilight Princess. When Twilight Princess first released, it was arguably one of the most anticipated titles in the series, as it aimed its sights at a more mature and thematically dark tone, which is something the fans were clamoring for after Wind Waker decided to adopt a more vibrant, cel-shaded art direction. Twilight Princess would receive widespread critical acclaim, became the highest-selling entry in the series until Breath of the Wild, and would go on to cement itself as one of the series' finest entries. It's practically perfect. However, much like the other entries, Twilight Princess does have a handful of oversights. Most would probably point to that infamous game-breaking bug in the cannon room, in which saving before transporting the cannon would render your progress as completely fruitless, but that's not quite in the scope of this video. Instead, I'm fixating on a far less destructive and more humorous oversight that was a clear-cut example of remnants of cut content being left in the game. See, most Zelda games prior to Twilight Princess often bestowed Link with a magic meter that would allow him to perform numerous spells and abilities. The only catch is that your magic meter will naturally deplete as you use magic. Go figure. How do you restore it? 2 words: chew jelly. Now, contrary to what you might think, chew jelly isn't the aftermath of an ogre getting sexually stimulated, a smurf getting crushed to a pulp, or a vasectomy gone awry, but instead a gelatinous substance used to make a wide variety of potions. In the previous Zelda titles, green chew jelly was associated with replenishing your magic meter, but in Twilight Princess, the magic meter was mysteriously absent, probably because this version of Link exuded so much raw strength that giving him a green potion would have been like giving the Flash a used Nissan Altima. However, green chew jelly would still be found in the final release of Twilight Princess, more specifically the Wii version. By scooping up some green chew jelly after defeating a green chew, you'll end up with the aforementioned green-coated concoction, but in a baffling oversight, upon picking it up for the first time, Link will proudly display the green potion while a blank text box appears on the bottom half of the screen. Traditionally, when you uncover a new item in a Zelda game, it will often be accompanied with a text description, but this wasn't the case with the green chew jelly. Upon ingesting said potion, you'll end up like the poor sucker who got swindled into buying hair growth tonic from a snake oil salesman, left with absolutely nothing but disappointment and the potential side effect of bleeding from your rectum. Though some believe that this was some sort of obscure practical joke from Nintendo, in reality it was actually an oversight that stemmed from leftover code. Despite removing the magic meter from the game, Nintendo forgot to remove the ability to pick up green chew jelly, which is explicitly designed to refill said magic meter. That being said, Nintendo would ultimately embrace this error by addressing it in the Twilight Princess HD remaster for the Wii U. Well played, Nintendo. Well played. Alright, so let's talk about another humorous oversight left in the final game, the developer note from Hitman Blood Money. So as I've said in previous videos, I love the Hitman series. It's packed to the brim with excellent levels, absurdly creative assassinations, and enough brutal kill compilations to the point where I'm surprised that none of the uploaders are on a watch list. Now, despite the rather grim and macabre subject matter that the series has proudly exhibited since day one, the Hitman games have done an exceptional job at balancing the rather dichotomous nature of the series' tone. On one hand, here's Rico Delgado, a remorseless cartel leader who has no problem ending people's lives if it suits his needs. On the other hand, here's me feeding him to his pet hippo. So naturally, the series has always embraced its more goofy side, made evident by a now iconic developer oversight left in the game that many people consider the best in the series, Hitman Blood Money. For as acclaimed as Hitman Blood Money is, you'd be surprised at the amount of developer oversights that are prevalent within this game. Take, for example, a mistake that occurs as early as the opening level. In that level, you're tasked with assassinating a businessman who owns a now-abandoned amusement park. Why? Well, because the person who hired you is a grieving parent whose child died by virtue of an accident that occurred within the aforementioned theme park. So what's the problem? Well, in the introductory cutscene, a news report indicates that the accident occurred in 2005, but the mission itself takes place in 2004. There's even an audio clip that states that it's been 5 years passing since the accident.
5 years since the tragedy closed the gates of Southland Park, but...
Which would actually mean that the aforementioned disaster took place in 1999. Either Hitman takes place in a convoluted multiverse, or the storyboard director popped a molly before cobbling a few dates together and calling it a timeline. Or how about the Murder of Crows, the level that takes place in New Orleans? It's set in the middle of a Mardi Gras parade, and for those who don't know what Mardi Gras is, it's kind of like Thanksgiving week, except instead of family get-togethers and 60% deals on TVs and assorted electronics for a few days, it's a week-long justification for getting shit-faced drunk and catching a few charges for indecent exposure.
Just got some information about a male and a female possibly having sexual intercourse on the street.
The mission takes place in late October of 2004, roughly a month before a presidential election is set to transpire. Sounds fine on paper until you realize that A, Mardi Gras occurs almost exclusively in spring, and B, the so-called election that is set to occur a month after this mission is absolute horseshit, because subsequent missions that take place in 2005 explicitly mention that the election hasn't occurred yet. I'd make a conspiracy theory joke, but I don't want the FBI pounding on my front door. Oh, fuck me. And look, you might think I'm sounding a little pedantic, I get that. But there's one developer oversight that you just can't ignore. That being the one that takes place in the level known as A Dance with the Devil. In this level, Agent 47 has to eliminate a corrupt CIA agent and his lover at an extravagant nightclub, hosting two parties, one themed to heaven and the other to hell. If you manage to locate the freezer room in the hell section of the nightclub, you'll uncover a crate that holds an assortment of food items, most notably lobsters. Well, if you pick it up, all seems fine and dandy. That is until you open your inventory and read the description of the aforementioned crate. Instead of a generic description of the item, you're left with a developer note that was never coded out of the game, reading, "Alan, please add details." If you're curious, this particular note is in reference to Alan Hansen, a 3D graphic art designer who worked on the game. Apparently, Alan over here was either a highly lauded asset to the development team, or the studio's favorite footrest, because he's even referenced in the form of a poster found in the level A House of Cards, in which the magician on said poster borrows his name verbatim. Now, in a contemporary video game landscape, this oversight would have led to any and all employees named Alan in the studio to be promptly kicked out the door and forced to work for Ubisoft as a form of savage punishment. But thankfully, the developers took this error in stride. In subsequent entries, this particular oversight has been referenced to the point where making a callback to its existence is essentially customary. In Hitman Absolution, if you score 666 points at the shooting range in the mission Birdie's Gift, the exact same message will appear on the screen. Hell, in re-releases of Hitman Blood Money, the developers even toyed around with the idea again. Because in the Hitman HD trilogy, if you pick up the crate and read its description, it'll say, "Any details yet, Alan?" If you do the same thing in Hitman Blood Money Reprisal, you'll see another unique note on the Lobster Crate, with it saying, "Seriously, Alan, it's been 17 years. Any details yet?" Hell, not even the World of Assassination trilogy was spared from this, because you can find multiple references to the same mistake peppered throughout the games and even the website, funnily enough. At the end of the day, I think that this should serve as a testament to the idea that there are no mistakes, just happy accidents, as Bob Ross would say. I would know, my parents described me as such. Hopefully you're doing well, Alan, but please make sure to add details next time. Or don't, I don't know. It led to a legendary inside joke, so what do I know? So next, I'm going to be talking about a minuscule yet relatively notorious developer oversight from Batman Arkham City. Arkham City was the monumental and highly ambitious follow-up to the already groundbreaking Batman Arkham Asylum, but it was an improvement in every sense of the word. It gave you a massive city to explore, a refined combat system, and a knockout punch of a story. It's the story in particular that I'm going to be talking about today, because Arkham City's story has been excessively analyzed by die-hard fans to an almost absurd degree. Can't really blame them, considering that the series is packed to the brim with meticulous attention to detail and cryptic bits of foreshadowing, but this fixation on the series would lead to fans assuming that a simple developer oversight completely altered the events of the game's ending. Spoilers, by the way, if you haven't played this game, I suggest you do, because it's fucking awesome. Throughout Arkham City's story, the Joker is consistently displayed in a way that makes him seem a bit under the weather, so to speak. Personally, I think just sleeping it off or chugging some cough syrup would have done the trick, but hey, I'm no doctor. What do you say, bud? Okay, scratch that. See, the Joker's blood has been tainted by the Titan formula that he injected himself with towards the end of Arkham Asylum. It caused him to transform into a grotesque, roided-up abomination, minus the deep-rooted insecurities and scam-adjacent coaching courses. Naturally, he wants a cure, and Batman's just the guy to get it done. So he manages to ensnare Batman in a trap, gets Harley to knock him unconscious, and by the time Batman wakes up, the Joker has not only performed a blood transfusion on him, but has also issued his own poisoned blood into Gotham's hospitals. That's like if you were stuck in the desert with a friend, you passed out from chronic dehydration, and you woke up to the sight of your friend pissing in your mouth to get you some fluids. Oh, and by the way, he has gonorrhea. This means that Batman's gonna have to conjure up a cure, and fast. After a series of convoluted and archaic ordeals, Batman finally manages to forge a cure, courtesy of Mr. Freeze, but Harley manages to snatch it and bring it back to the Joker. By the time Batman gets back, the Joker has seemingly fully recovered from his ailment, implying that he was able to use the serum. However, in one of gaming's most iconic and genuinely ingenious plot twists of all time, it turns out that the Joker never got the chance to take it, and the more healthy and vigorous version of him was actually Clayface in disguise the whole time. Now this is the part where things get a little odd, because after going toe-to-toe with Clayface in a climactic intense battle, Batman ends up destroying the Lazarus Pit, a site that's capable of restoring life and providing eternal youth by virtue of a blend of chemicals. Batman decides to destroy the site, which causes a massive explosion, rendering him unconscious. Upon waking up, he drinks some of the serum, gets into a bit of a scuffle with the Joker, and the vial shatters, stripping away the potency of the contents within, meaning that the Joker doesn't have a cure as he succumbs to his disease. Now, here's where the developer oversight kicks in. When Batman reacts to the Lazarus Pit explosion, he does manage to cling onto the serum in his left hand, but upon his awakening, the vial mysteriously swaps to his right hand. Now, I know what you're thinking, why in the hell is something this trivial worth mentioning for the video? Well, because to some of the more observant and astute fans, this wasn't an oversight. This was a possible indication of the Joker surviving the whole ordeal. See, fans had theorized that this unintentional switcheroo was actually a result of one of two different scenarios. Number one, while Batman was knocked unconscious, the Joker crept into the scene, snatched the vial, drank some of it, and placed it in his other hand on accident, meaning that the Joker that dies at the end of Arkham City is actually Clayface in disguise. And number two, one of the most far-reaching and hilariously convoluted explanations that I have ever heard. The idea is that Batman, while in the process of reacting to a fucking explosion, intentionally shifted the vial to his other hand because he knew that the Joker was going to attack him from that side, meaning that when Batman woke up and got into the aforementioned scuffle with the Joker, he would end up dropping the vial and would successfully kill him without directly causing his demise. Let that sink in. There was even a post I saw that stated that one of the directors of the game's story, Sefton Hill, had confirmed that the inexplicable vial swap was intentional, but I have yet to find any footage or documented instance of him saying anything even remotely close to this. If someone else can solidify this claim, please enlighten me in the comments. I spent 3 days trying to find this, and all I ended up with was a search history synonymous to the ramblings of a meth addict. In the end, however, this was nothing more than a measly oversight that ballooned into something far more complex, as by the time Arkham Knight was released, all of the aforementioned theories would be ultimately squashed when the opening cutscene saw the corpse of the Joker being burned alive, confirming his demise. Goes to show you that the internet is one of the only places where a simple continuity error becomes a full-fledged theory. But speaking of mistakes, I'll tell you what isn't a mistake: Factor 75, the sponsor of this video. So if you're like me and you love video games, your hands are conditioned to do one thing and one thing only: masterfully maneuver around a game controller. However, they're not made for other more practical activities, like mowing the lawn, partaking in a thumb war, or in the context of this video, cooking. That's where Factor 75 comes into the picture. Factor 75 specializes in providing you with high-quality meals delivered directly to your doorstep. Factor takes the stress out of meal planning and sets you up for success. Skip the grocery stores, prep work, and cooking fatigue. Instead, get chef-crafted, dietitian-approved meals delivered right to your door. With over 35 meals to choose from per week, including options like keto, calorie smart, vegan and veggie, and more. And when I say chef-crafted, trust me, I mean it, because the quality of the food speaks for itself.
Yeah. It's
Hold on. Oh my god. Oh, that's good. That's really good. Woo! C-Shift seal of approval. That's good. That is good. I'm gonna have a little more. One of my personal favorite aspects of Factor is the convenience of it. Normally, if I want to concoct some elaborate meal, I have to immediately stop what I'm doing, spend anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour making something that ends up looking like toxic sludge, and then doing the same thing roughly 6 or so hours later. It's quite time consuming, and if I have to spend an extensive amount of time doing anything besides making videos, you bet your bottom dollar that it'll hinder my workflow. With Factor, I don't have to worry about any of that. Just pop it in the microwave for roughly 2 to 3 minutes, and now you've got yourself a restaurant quality meal at your fingertips. And if your budget begins to skyrocket, or you hit a few financial hurdles, don't worry, because when things get a bit hectic, Factor is flexible. Change your order up every week with plans from 4 to 18 meals per week, or pause and reschedule your deliveries anytime. And if you want to give Factor a go, I've got a little something for you guys to try. Head to factor75.com or click the link below and use code 50CShift to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first Factor box. That's code 50CShift at factor75.com to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box. Thank you to Factor for sponsoring, and without further ado, let's get back to the video. Okay, so this next example technically takes place in the form of a trailer for a game as opposed to the game itself, but damn it, this is the only time I'm going to be able to talk about it, so just bear with me for a second. You guys remember Mortal Kombat 1, right? Yeah, it hurts me too. So back when the game was still receiving fresh waves of content, and the prospects of a Combat Pack 3 wasn't blindfolded and violently executed by firing squad, the second round of DLC characters was still going underway. One of the most exciting additions to the game, for me personally at least, was the long-requested addition of Ghostface from the Scream franchise. I love Scream. It's one of my favorite horror movies of all time, and it was somehow capable of overhauling and rejuvenating interest in the slasher subgenre of horror films, with its self-aware humor and notable acknowledgement of other prominent horror franchises. Despite this vast pool of inspiration to draw from, even I was a bit skeptical to the idea of Ghostface being a playable character, because it takes quite the talented team to make a guy with a knife, a scary mask, and a penchant for making unsolicited phone calls about horror movie trivia into a character that successfully fits into a fighting game roster. But my god, if there was any team to do it, it was absolutely NetherRealm Studios, because holy shit, they knocked it out of the park. That first gameplay trailer had me foaming at the mouth and what- Hold on.
Do you like scary movies?
Oh, fuck off, Gerald. However, towards the latter half of that gameplay trailer, fans started to pick up on a truly questionable oversight that I'm genuinely shocked made it past the approval stage. Then again, this game was published by Warner Brothers, and they gave the green light for that god-awful Suicide Squad game, so what do I know? At the end of the trailer, Ghostface displays one of his fatalities, which serves as the final knockout punch factor in order to really drum up some hype and excitement. In order to show it to you without getting demonetized, here's me using it on every MK1 Fatality compilation video's favorite punching bag, Reptile.
Surprise!
No!
Fatality. Ghostface wins.
Look, I main Reptile in this game. It hurts me more than it hurts you. Notice how the fatality ends with Ghostface and his accomplice's signature move after scoring a kill, the now iconic knife swipe. If you look back at the original trailer, however, something seems a little bit off. In a truly baffling oversight, the final trailer shows one of the ghost faces gripping the knife backwards and sliding blood off of the hilt rather than the blade itself. Now, if this was a visual error that occurred once in a blue moon when the character first released, I would obviously be a bit more understanding. But the problem is that this is an official trailer for a character and the game you're trying to sell. This made it through the editors, the higher-ups that probably needed to look this over, and everyone else in between. You mean to tell me that no one discovered this prior to the trailer's release? Personally, here's what I think happened. Instead of making a separate animation for the other Ghostface, the developers were probably in a bit of a crunch to get this trailer out as soon as possible, and simply decided to duplicate the original Ghostface animation and horizontally flip him. The problem is that they forgot to flip the knife, which I would assume is an entity that is separate from Ghostface's player model, hence the result you see here. Thankfully, this was rectified by the time Ghostface was added to the game as a playable character, but to this day, you can still spot this error in the official Ghostface gameplay reveal trailer. Alright, so let's revisit that niche concept of developer oversights in superhero games, because we're talking about Marvel's Spider-Man 2. Now, if you remember playing this game when it first released, you might not know what the hell I'm even talking about in the first place, as it was actually a rare instance of a modern AAA video game containing little to no bugs on day one, minus a few odd glitches here and there. Well, I'm not talking about the moment that the game first came out, because I'm actually talking about an oversight that was introduced in a subsequent patch, believe it or not. See, whenever version 1.002 of this game was released, it came packaged with an abundance of new content. We're talking new costumes, additional photo mode content, and even a new Game Plus mode. However, some of the more curious players unintentionally discovered a, let's say, covert addition to the game. Believe it or not, the developers at Insomniac Games accidentally left an entire debug menu in the 1.002 update. If you don't know what a debug menu is, it's essentially a developer toolbox that is explicitly designed for playtesting and messing around with the game's variables. Think of it as a far more sophisticated and expansive version of a cheat menu or a trainer. It quite literally gives you access to manipulate the game in just about whatever fashion you like. Now, how was this discovered? Well, I'm not sure, because it can only be found by pressing a highly complex combination of button inputs. That's absolute bullshit, by the way. All you had to do was press the touchpad and the start button at the same time. It was that simple. Now, in terms of what it offered, well, it allowed players to bypass missions, alter the graphical settings, and even fool around with some cheat codes. Most notably, there was one that allowed you to freely explore the open world environment as Venom, whereas normally you would only be confined to specific missions in order to play as him. However, one of the most exciting discoveries was data that, at the time, hinted at the prospect of future DLC. Unfortunately, said DLC was cancelled. This was an absolute goldmine of a discovery, but naturally, Insomniac wasn't all too keen on the notion of players getting an all-access pass to look under the hood of Spider-Man 2's code. Understandably so. I mean, you have to understand that Insomniac was just recovering from being the target of a now infamous data leak just 2 months after the game's initial release. Yeah, you know, the one that showcased most of Insomniac's future projects, that one. So for something this massive to be left in a content update, yeah, I'd imagine that morale at the studio wasn't exactly hitting its peak during that time frame. Insomniac would go to Twitter and make a post warning players to not utilize the developer menu, while they desperately scrambled to get an emergency patch out the door. They went so far as to say that using the developer menu could corrupt your save files and your trophy progress. And while I'm not sure if this was actually the case, it was definitely something that deterred me from giving it a try. Regardless, a patch was swiftly issued, thus making the developer menu impossible to use in future updates. But some would try to circumvent this by disabling their internet before said patch went live. Of course, this oversight wouldn't hinder Spider-Man 2's success, as the game would go on to sell over 11 million copies and had already garnered critical acclaim by that point. But still, it's genuinely baffling to me that an entire developer menu went unnoticed until it was too late. And for the final entry, we're looking at a game that, in and of itself, might as well be considered a massive developer mistake. We're venturing into no man's land and talking about Sonic the Hedgehog 2006. Good God almighty. Sonic 06 is a catastrophic dumpster fire of a game in every sense of the word. It's janky beyond belief, has a lackluster plotline, corny dialogue, and is riddled with enough bugs to make an entomologist wet between the thighs. In other words, this game is an absolute abomination, and a strain on the otherwise rich legacy of the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise. Well, up to that point at least, but we don't talk about that one. Now, despite the game's piss-poor reception, Sonic 06 has gained somewhat of a cult following over the years, largely due to the so-bad-it's-good nature of, well, everything about it, but others have also expressed sympathy towards the developers who had to work on this thing because of its hectic development cycle, with some believing that the game isn't nearly as atrocious as people make it to be. I vehemently disagree, but hey, to each their own. Now, contrary to what you might initially think, Sonic 06 wasn't exclusively a simple case of an extremely rushed development cycle. It was certainly a factor, but there were so many other elements that led to its botched launch, such as the co-creator of Sonic, Yuji Naka, leaving in the middle of development, unrealistic deadlines, a myriad of porting hurdles, and numerous plot lines and concepts that would ultimately become scrapped in the midst of development. It's the last subject that I'm going to be fixating on in this video because, good lord, there are a jarringly high quantity of unused or abandoned elements that ended up making it into the final game, leading to quite the array of narrative and contextual discrepancies. I won't delve into every single one, but I'll give you some of my personal favorite highlights. Take, for example, this boss battle while playing as Shadow. After fighting the Egg Cerberus for a bit, you'll hear Shadow make this remark. But then, after trying to tackle the boss battle using a different technique, nothing changes. You just engage the boss as you normally would with no other means of defeating it. This means that the developers were planning on adding another phase or additional method to defeating the boss, but they just canned the idea and left the original dialogue in the game. Okay, maybe a slight oversight, nothing too major. Well, how about this one? If you're playing as Shadow and you buy the blue memory shard from a vendor, you'll notice a description on the right-hand side of the screen that states that Shadow's Chaos Snap ability is an upgrade that's applied to both the Chaos Attack and the Chaos Smash. What's the Chaos Smash? Sounds like the name of an exotic cocktail or a bad night at the brothel. But no, it was actually slated to be Shadow's answer to Sonic's homing ball ability. But it was never implemented in the game, so all we have is leftover text that was never coded out. You can somewhat restore its functionality by hacking or modding it into the game, but why anyone would willingly do that is beyond me, unless it's for the sake of novelty. That's like putting a band-aid on a gunshot wound to the chest. It looks better, but it doesn't change the fact that you're one ill-timed cough away from dying of blood loss and cardiac failure. Oh, and speaking of abilities, here's an interesting one. Some of the abilities that you can use in the game often require the use of this meter at the bottom right portion of the screen. The characters who utilize this meter are the ones you play as the most: Sonic, Silver, and Shadow. Ironically, due to a tremendous developer oversight, only Shadow and Silver's abilities cause the meter to drain. This means that you can relentlessly abuse all of Sonic's abilities and completely break the game, though granted, based on the footage you've been seeing, you could probably surmise that breaking it wasn't exactly an arduous task to begin with. And it's both ironic and rather apt because Sonic, the character on the front cover of the fucking game, was seemingly neglected in this particular aspect. You can't make this shit up. But if you think those mistakes were interesting, well, the last two were arguably the most infamous in the game, and for good reason. Throughout the story, you'll notice this item known as the Scepter of Darkness, a narrative MacGuffin that's used to trap one of the game's antagonists, Meffles. However, there's a particular segment in which Rouge the Bat gets a call from a GUN agent that audibly refers to it as the Book of Darkness, despite the text indicating that it is indeed a scepter.
Agent Rouge, report your status immediately. Have you retrieved the Book of Darkness?
This is due to the fact that, during the game's development, the scepter was originally made to resemble a book, but when the developers changed it to a scepter, they completely forgot to remove this narratively disjointed dialogue. Imagine if this happened in more titles. Eat my master sword, you piece of shit. But right when you thought that was the most embarrassing mistake that this game made, there's another segment that, ironically enough, also features a GUN agent. In a segment that takes place in Shadow's storyline, you'll hear a GUN agent buzzing in over a radio and commanding Shadow to head to the Wave Ocean. However, even something as simple as a straightforward line delivery was off the table for this game, because you can hear the voice actor stop himself mid-sentence and perform another take.
Agent Shadow, E123 Omega has engaged Meffles. Head to the Wave Ocean, head to Wave Ocean. Agent Shadow, E123 Omega has engaged Meffles. Head to Wave Ocean immediately.
Miraculously, this wasn't altered, re-recorded, or cut in any capacity. At least with the Oblivion example, there was a chance that you'd be able to unintentionally avoid it by skipping the dialogue after hearing the first take. In the case of Sonic 06, however, it takes center stage, because the quality control team was just as competent at playtesting the game as gas station sushi is at giving you a peaceful bowel movement. And look, I could go on and describe countless examples of mistakes like this, but just trust me, there are far too many for me to fully discuss here. Check out these two videos, one by Chari5 and one by Matt McMuscles, as they were both extremely rich sources to draw from when it came to researching this absolute shit show of a title. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm gonna try to beat Sonic 06. Not because I enjoy the game, but because I apparently enjoy experiences that are tantamount to viewing a snuff film for the first time. Oh, and would you look at that? It's everyone's favorite psychokinetic hedgehog, Silver. He's one of the few half-decent additions to this game, so maybe his boss fight will compensate for something.
It's no use!
God damn it, Sonic, let me show you how we do it in the South.